Have you ever wondered what happens when the person who is supposed to welcome you into their family becomes the very person who decides to destroy your life? I ask you this question because I want you to think about it as you read my story. Really think about it, because the answer is not what you might expect, and it took me 15 years of marriage to truly understand it. My name is Sarah. I'm 40 years old, I'm a copywriter, and I live in Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York where everyone knows everyone else's business. This is the story of how my mother-in-law, Patricia, systematically destroyed the life I built with her son, my husband, David. If you're reading this and nodding your head, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your marriage because of toxic relatives, please subscribe. You are not alone in this struggle, and sometimes just knowing that changes everything. When I first met David 20 years ago in a coffee shop downtown, he was everything I had ever dreamed of. Tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes, and a laugh that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. On that first day, we talked for hours about books, dreams, and plans for the future. He worked at a local bank, was stable and reliable, and I was a freelance copywriter, building my business from the ground up. 3 months into our relationship, he finally introduced me to his mother. Patricia was a 60-year-old widow who had raised David alone after his father died when he was 12. She lived in the same house where David grew up, a Victorian house on Elm Street with a perfectly manicured garden and lace curtains on all the windows. As soon as I entered the house, I felt cold, not from the air conditioning, but from Patricia herself. She looked me up and down as if I were something unpleasant she had found on her shoe. Her greeting was polite but cold. "So you're the girl David spends all his time with." Not woman, not Sarah, just girl. David squeezed my hand and smiled nervously. "Mom, this is Sarah. I've told you a lot about her." "Yes," Patricia said, keeping her pale blue eyes fixed on my face. "I'm sure you have." That dinner was a 2-hour interrogation disguised as a get-to-know-you conversation. Where did I go to college? What did my parents do? Did I go to church? How much did I make as a freelancer? Every question felt like an exam I was failing simply by existing. When we left that evening, David apologized. "She just cares," he said. "She'll warm up to you when she gets to know you better." I wanted to believe him. I loved him and thought that love could conquer all. Looking back, I realized that was my first mistake. David proposed to me 2 years later, on Christmas Eve. We were in my cozy one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore on Main Street, and he got down on one knee right in front of my little Christmas tree. The ring was simple but beautiful, just the kind I would have chosen for myself. I was on cloud 9. David was nervous but happy. Patricia was stunned. Of course, she didn't say she was stunned. Patricia was too smart for that. Instead, she said things like, "Well, that's certainly unexpected, and I hope you've thought this through, David." When David told her we wanted a small wedding, she insisted on helping with the planning. "After all," she said, "I know all the best vendors in town. I have connections you just don't have, dear." That "dear" always sounded like an insult. What followed were months during which Patricia slowly and methodically took control of our wedding. She changed the venue without asking us, because a country club is much more appropriate than that rustic barn you picked. She changed the guest list, adding dozens of her friends and removing several of mine, because we just can't invite everyone, and family friends take priority. She even tried to change my dress. I fell in love with a simple, elegant dress from a boutique in Albany. Patricia looked at it and said, "Oh dear, it's too plain. Don't you want something more dramatic, something more appropriate for the wife of a bank manager?" David, caught between his mother and his fiancé, tried to keep the peace. "Just let her help, Sarah," he said. "This is very important to her. She never planned her daughter's wedding." But I wasn't her daughter. That was becoming increasingly clear.
The turning point came 3 weeks before the wedding. I arrived at Patricia's house for what I thought was the final planning meeting, only to discover that she had invited David's ex-girlfriend, Michelle, to lunch. Michelle had dated David in high school and had recently moved back to town after her divorce. "I thought you'd enjoy meeting some of David's old friends," Patricia said, smiling sweetly as Michelle and I greeted each other. "Michelle and David have such a wonderful history."
I sat there for an hour, listening to Patricia and Michelle reminisce about David's teenage years, about how Michelle was practically part of the family, about how some people just naturally fit into our little community. The message was clear. Michelle belonged there. I didn't. That evening, I told David what had happened. For the first time, I saw him truly angry with his mother. He called her immediately and said things I wasn't allowed to hear behind closed doors. The next day, Patricia apologized to me, but her apology seemed insincere and empty. "I didn't mean to hurt you, dear. I just wanted to help you make friends in town." Despite everything, our wedding day was beautiful. David looked gorgeous in his tuxedo, I was radiant in my simple dress, and for a few hours I forgot about all the drama and focused only on marrying the man I loved. In her speech, the groom's mother, Patricia, talked about David's childhood, his achievements, and her hopes for his future. She mentioned me exactly once. And now David has found someone with whom he wants to share his life. Not the love of his life, not his perfect match, just someone. The first few years of marriage were a masterclass in subtle psychological warfare. Patricia never did anything that would warrant serious confrontation. Instead, she slowly eroded my self-confidence and my place in the family with small, precise blows. She called David every day, usually during dinner. If I answered the phone, she would say, "Oh, hi, honey, is David home?" Never, "How's it going?" Never acknowledging that I might have something interesting to say. These calls could last for hours. David would pace around our small house, listening to news about the neighbors, complaints about her health, and requests to fix things in her house. Our romantic dinners became cold while he dealt with his mother's latest problems. When we visited her, as we did every Sunday after church, Patricia served David his favorite dishes and offered me whatever was left. She would ask him detailed questions about his work, his friends, his interests, and then turn to me with polite, superficial questions about the weather or whether I was busy with my little writing projects. She never asked me directly about my work, never acknowledged that I was building a successful freelance business, never showed any interest in my thoughts or opinions on any important issues. At family gatherings, she proudly introduced David to relatives and friends, listing his achievements and his position at the bank. Then she would add, almost as an afterthought, "And this is his wife, Sarah. She writes." Writes always sounded embarrassed, as if I earned a living by making shopping lists. David didn't notice any of this. When I tried to talk to him about how his mother treated me, he became defensive. "She's just old-fashioned," he said. "She doesn't have anything against you. She's actually trying very hard to accept you." "David, yesterday she introduced me to your cousin as the woman David married, not your wife, not Sarah, the woman David married. You're too sensitive, Sarah. She's not used to there being another woman in my life. Give her time." Time. Always time. I gave her 5 years, then 10, waiting for that magical moment when she would finally accept me, but it never came. 4 years after our wedding, David and I started trying for children. We were both excited about the idea of starting a family, filling our home with laughter, chaos, and love. However, Patricia had her own opinion about our plans. "Don't you think you should wait until you're settled in life?" she asked David one Sunday. "Maybe when Sarah has a more stable career, freelancing is so unpredictable." When we tried unsuccessfully to conceive for a year, Patricia's comments became more pointed. "You know, stress can affect fertility," she said to me one afternoon as I was helping her in the garden. "Maybe if you didn't work so much, didn't put so much pressure on yourself with your business." We started seeing a fertility specialist in Albany, driving there twice a week, which took an hour each way. It was emotionally and physically exhausting, but we were determined. David was supportive and loving throughout the process, holding my hand during every appointment and every injection. Patricia, however, seemed to take our difficulties as confirmation of her fears about me. "Maybe it's God trying to tell you something," she said to David one day, unaware that I could hear her from the kitchen. "Maybe you need to focus on other things right now, your career, taking care of me as I get older." After 3 years of trying, including 2 miscarriages that broke my heart, we came to terms with the fact that we would not have children. It wasn't the life we had planned, but we found ways to fill it with meaning. I immersed myself in my work, building a client base that extended beyond our small town. David was promoted to assistant manager at the bank. Patricia's reaction to our decision to stop trying was telling: relief. She never said she was glad we wouldn't have children, but her shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. She started talking about how nice it would be for David to have more time for the family, meaning her. "Children aren't for everyone," she said at her bridge club, according to Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door to us. "Some people are too self-centered to be good parents." When Mrs. Henderson told me what Patricia had said, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. David was at work, and I had no one to call who would understand. My mother lived on the other side of the country, and my few friends in town were busy with their growing families. It was then that I truly understood how isolated Patricia had made me feel. By the 10th year of our marriage, my copywriting business had grown to a size I could never have imagined. I worked with clients in New York, wrote marketing campaigns for major brands, and earned more than David. I loved my job, loved the creative challenges, loved the independence it gave me. Patricia hated every minute of my success. She never congratulated me on landing a big contract or successfully completing a campaign. Instead, she made comments about how I was never home and how David looked tired and neglected. She would ask David in front of me if he was eating well and if he had to do all the housework himself. "Sarah is so busy with her projects," she would say, making my career sound like a hobby that had gotten out of hand. The worst part was how she undermined my authority in front of other townspeople. I learned from my dentist receptionist that Patricia had been telling people I sit at the computer all day instead of looking for a real job. When the local newspaper decided to do a story on successful small businesses in the area and asked me for an interview, Patricia somehow convinced the editor that there were more established businesses that would be more suitable subjects for the story. She told David that I was overestimating myself and that success was changing me for the worse. She said she was worried that I was losing sight of what was really important, my marriage and my family responsibilities. David, to his credit, defended my work to his mother. But he also started asking me if I really needed to work so many hours, if I could turn down some clients so I could spend more time at home with him. "Mom's right, I hardly ever see you," he said one evening after I had spent the whole day in my home office working on the launch of a major campaign. "David, this is my career. It's what I've built. Would you ask your male colleagues to work less because their wives miss them? It's different, Sarah. I have to work. We need my income. We need my income too. I make more than you do." The conversation ended in an argument that lasted 3 days. David slept on the couch and barely spoke to me. When we finally made up, it was because I agreed to be more mindful of my work-life balance, which somehow led me to turn down several lucrative projects and cut back on my hours. That year, my income dropped by 30%. Patricia was thrilled. David's father had left a small life insurance policy, and Patricia had been living on that money and Social Security for many years. When David and I had been married for 12 years, she started talking about updating her will and what would happen to the family home when she was gone.
At first, these conversations seemed normal. She was in her 70s, and it made sense that she would be thinking about how to distribute her estate. But I soon realized that Patricia was using the inheritance as a weapon to control David's behavior and, by extension, mine. "I'm thinking of leaving the house to a historical society," she said casually one Sunday. "Unless David wants to come back someday, of course. Well, if circumstances change." Circumstances? As if my marriage to her son was a temporary inconvenience? She began to hint at how much the house meant to her, how it was filled with family memories, how she hoped it would remain in the family with people who truly appreciate its history and significance. When I suggested to David that we buy our own house instead of renting the small apartment we had lived in for over 10 years, Patricia responded sharply and bluntly. "Why tie your money up in real estate when you could one day inherit the family home?" she asked David. "Of course, it will depend on many factors, on your priorities, your commitments, whether you will continue to value family traditions." David was torn. He loved his childhood home, and he liked the idea of inheriting it. But he also wanted to build a life with me that didn't depend entirely on his mother's approval. "Maybe we should wait and see what happens," he said. "Mom isn't getting any younger, and the house would save us so much money." And we waited. And while we waited, we spent money on rent instead of saving up. While we waited, Patricia used the promise of inheritance hanging over us to influence every important decision in our lives. She didn't want us to go on vacation because what if something happens while you're gone? She didn't want David to consider job opportunities in other cities because how can you leave when I might need you? She didn't want us to make any major purchases because you have to save money for the house and all the expenses that come with it when you get it. Every aspect of our life was hostage to the house and an inheritance that might never materialize.
Last year, Patricia's health began to decline. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that she needed extra help with everyday tasks. David immediately took charge, visiting her every day after work and spending all his weekends fixing things around her house, taking her to doctor's appointments, and helping with errands. I supported him completely. She was his mother. She had raised him alone, and she deserved care and respect in her old age. I even offered to help, to drive her to appointments when David couldn't, bring her food, spend time with her so she wouldn't feel lonely. Patricia told David that my help would be too much trouble and that she preferred not to complicate things and to get by with just the help of her family. But the thing is, I was part of the family. I had been part of the family for 15 years. I was there for every birthday, every holiday, every family event. I sent her cards, brought her gifts, listened to her stories, and tried in every way possible to build a relationship with her. None of it mattered. In Patricia's eyes, I was always an outsider, a stranger, the woman who stole her son. The turning point came 3 months ago. David was working overtime to cover for a colleague who was on sick leave, and I offered to stop by Patricia's place during my lunch break. She mentioned that she needed help with her medication, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. When I arrived at her house, Patricia seemed surprised to see me. "David didn't say you were coming," she said, not inviting me in. "He doesn't know. I just thought I'd stop by and see if you needed anything." She looked at me for a long time, and then something changed in her expression. For the first time in 15 years, Patricia dropped her polite mask and showed me what she really thought of me. "You want to know what I need, Sarah? I need my son. I need the David who called me every day just to talk, who spent all his free time with me, who valued my opinion and listened to my advice. I need the son I had before you came along and convinced him that his mother was some kind of burden he had to deal with." I stood there, unable to say a word, as 15 years of resentment poured out of her.
"Do you think I don't see what you've done? How you gradually pushed him away from me? How you made him choose between his wife and his mother over and over again? How you turned him against his own family? Patricia, I never asked David to choose. You didn't have to ask. Your very existence is a choice.
Every day he comes home to you instead of spending time with me is a choice. Every holiday we have to coordinate and compromise because of your family traditions is a choice. Every decision he makes that puts your marriage above his duty to his mother is a choice. She moved closer to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. I raised this boy alone for 8 years after his father died. I sacrificed everything for him. I never remarried, never put another man before my son's needs. I worked 2 jobs to pay for his college education, deprived myself of everything so he could have everything he needed. And then you came along and made him forget all that. I never made him forget. You made him forget that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that marriage is just a piece of paper, and the bond between a mother and her son is sacred and eternal. At that moment, I knew there was nothing that could make her change her mind. It wasn't about what I had or hadn't done. It was about Patricia's firm belief that no woman would ever be good enough for her son, and that any woman who tried to build a life with him would be stealing what was rightfully hers. That day, I left her house and drove home in a daze. When David came home from work, I told him everything that had happened. I expected him to be shocked to finally see his mother's behavior for what it really was. Instead, he was angry with me. Why did you go there without telling me? You know how worried she is about her health. Why did you put her in a position where she felt cornered? David, did you hear what I just said? Your mother said I stole you from her. She said our marriage is just a piece of paper. She's an old woman, Sarah. She's scared, lonely, and can't think straight. You should have just left when you realized she was upset. But don't you understand? That's how she really feels. That's what she's thought about me for 15 years. She'll never accept me, David. Never. David was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words broke my heart. Maybe if you tried harder to understand her point of view. Maybe if you tried harder to include her in our lives. After 15 years of marriage, my husband was still asking me to try harder to win over a woman who had spent our entire life together actively trying to destroy me. That night, I realized that Patricia wasn't just trying to ruin my life. She had succeeded. Let me answer the question I asked you at the beginning. What happens when the person who is supposed to welcome you into their family becomes the person who decides to destroy your life? Here's what's really going on. They don't destroy your life in one dramatic moment. They don't commit some unforgivable act that makes everyone see them as villains. Instead, they slowly, methodically undermine your sense of belonging, your self-confidence, and your place in your own marriage until you begin to doubt your own reality. They make you wonder if you're too sensitive, too demanding, unreasonable in your expectations of basic respect and acceptance. They turn every holiday into a negotiation, every family event into a test you're bound to fail, every milestone into a reminder that you'll never be part of this family. The worst part is that they do it in such a way that the person you love most in the world, your spouse, doesn't even notice. Or maybe they do, but they're so used to putting peace first that they ask you to be the one who constantly compromises, constantly understands, constantly tries harder. Patricia didn't ruin my life by doing something terrible to me. She ruined it by making me realize that after 15 years of marriage, I was still fighting for a place at the table where I would never be truly wanted. She destroyed it by showing me that my husband, the man I loved more than anything in the world, would always ask me to be more modest, quieter, more accommodating, instead of asking his mother to treat me with basic human dignity. The real tragedy is not that Patricia never accepted me. The real tragedy is that David never demanded that she do so. I am writing this story from my new apartment on the other side of town. David and I broke up 2 months ago, and next week we are starting divorce proceedings. He moved back into his childhood room at Patricia's house, probably exactly where she always wanted him to be.
Sometimes I feel guilty, wondering if I gave up too easily, if I should have tried harder, been more patient, found some way to make it work. But then I remember that I tried for 15 years, and the only thing that changed was that with each passing year, I became smaller, sadder, and more isolated. I am no longer angry at Patricia. I now understand that her behavior was driven by deep fear and pain. Losing her husband at a young age, raising David on her own, not being able to share the love of her life, these are real struggles that deserve compassion. But understanding someone else's pain doesn't mean accepting the right to hurt others. And that's what took me so long to understand. Now I am rebuilding my life, focusing on work, reconnecting with friends I lost touch with, and remembering who I was before I spent so many years trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. Starting over at 40 is scary, but it's also liberating. For the first time in 15 years, I don't have to worry about whether others approve of my choices, my career, my dreams, or my very existence. If you've read my story this far, if any of this resonates with you, know that you are not alone. Subscribe and become part of a community where your experiences matter and your feelings are important. And please, tell me in the comments, have you faced a similar situation? How did you deal with it? What would you have done differently? What advice would you give to someone who is going through the same thing right now? Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. You matter. And sometimes that's the most important thing to remember.